Later that afternoon, David sat in his new office, the same office where his story had begun before he was even born. Angela sat across from him, in the same chair she'd sat in 26 years ago, but this time with pride instead of fear in her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. David smiled, reaching across the desk to take his mother's hand. "Now we build something new. Something that helps people up instead of pushing them down. Something that would make that young woman with a dream and a baby on the way proud." "I'm already proud," Angela said, tears shining in her eyes. "So proud I can hardly breathe." Outside the window, Chicago stretched out before them, a city of possibilities, of second chances, of dreams both lost and found. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of hope, and somewhere in that golden light, the future was waiting to be written. One cup of coffee, one helping hand, one changed life at a time. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright over Chicago. Angela Wilson stood in front of Sterling Enterprises, looking up at the building that had changed her life 26 years ago. She wore a crisp white suit that contrasted beautifully with her skin, her hair now touched with elegant streaks of gray. Her hands trembled slightly, but her spine was straight, her head held high. "Ready, Mum?" David appeared beside her, looking sharp in his dark suit. He'd gotten up early to meet her at the airport, just like she used to pick him up from school every day. "Ready," she said, squeezing his hand. Together, they walked through the revolving doors into the lobby. The security guard did a double take. He was one of the few who'd been there long enough to remember Angela. She smiled at him as they passed, noting how his eyes widened in recognition. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like traveling through time. Angela could almost see her younger self stand in this same elevator, full of hopes and dreams, not knowing how her life was about to change. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. The boardroom was already full when they arrived. 12 board members sat around the massive table, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. James Sterling sat at the head of the table, looking like he hadn't slept. When he saw Angela, he stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward. For a moment, the room was absolutely silent. 26 years of unspoken words hum in the air between them. "Please, sit down," David said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew he held all the cards. "We have a lot to discuss." The next hour changed everything. David presented his case methodically, professionally. He showed the board members evidence of past misconduct, patterns of ethical violations, and his plans for reforming the company. But it was when he reached the personal part of the story that the room truly fell silent. 26 years ago, he said, the man sitting at the head of this table made a choice. He chose to fire a pregnant employee and offer her money to disappear, all to protect his image. That employee was my mother. That unborn child was me. The board members turned to look at James, then at Angela, then at David. The resemblance was undeniable. James Sterling stood up slowly. His face had aged decades in one night, but there was something different in his eyes, something that looked almost like peace. "Everything my son has said is true," he said quietly. "All of it. For years, I told myself I was building something great, something important. But last night, reading through those files, seeing the lives I've affected, I realized I was just building walls. Walls to keep people out, walls to hide behind." He turned to Angela. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I was a coward. You deserved better. You both did." Angela's voice was steady when she replied, "We didn't need better. We did just fine on our own." James nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. "Yes, you did. You built something real, something honest. And you," he turned to David, "you've become the kind of man I only pretended to be." He picked up a folder from the table. "I've already signed the papers. Effective immediately, I'm stepping down as CEO. I'm also transferring controlling interest of my shares to David, with the recommendation that he be appointed as my replacement." The boardroom burst into murmurs of surprise, but James held up his hand. "There's more. I'm establishing a foundation, the Wilson Foundation, with an initial endowment of $50 million. Its purpose will be to support single parents starting their own businesses, with a focus on minorities and women who face the same barriers my own son and his mother once faced." Angela's hand found David's under the table, squeezing tight. "The floor is yours," James said, stepping away from the head of the table. Don't make the same mistakes I did. The vote was unanimous. By noon, David Wilson was the new CEO of Sterling Enterprises. As the board members filed out, congratulating him, Angela stood by the window, looking out at the city where her story had begun. James approached her hesitantly. The coffee shop, is it still there? 3 locations now, she said, all doing well. He nodded. I'd like to visit sometime, if that's allowed. Baby steps, Angela replied, but her voice was gentle. We'll see. He picked up the folders from the table and held them out. Here, take these. Read them. Think about the kind of legacy you want to leave. The board meets at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The choice is yours. James took the folders with trembling hands. 26 years, he said quietly. You've grown into quite a man. No thanks to you, David replied, but his voice held more sadness than anger now. You know what the worst part is? You could have had it all: success, family, respect. Instead, you chose fear and pride. You chose to be alone. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing, my mother will be flying in tomorrow. After the board meeting, she'd like to see your office again. She says there's something poetic about coming full circle. James looked up sharply. Angela's coming here. Yes. And unlike you, she spent the last 26 years building something to be proud of. Think about that tonight while you're reading those files. The door closed behind David with a soft click, leaving James alone in the growing darkness, holding 2 folders that contained the power to either destroy or redeem his life's work. Outside, Chicago's lights began to twinkle on, the same view he'd had for decades, though tonight it looked different somehow, less like a kingdom he ruled, and more like a city full of people whose lives he'd never bothered to consider. He opened the first folder and began to read, knowing that by this time tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. The next 48 hours at Sterling Enterprises felt like watching a hurricane approach in slow motion. David's revelation had shaken the company to its core, though only a handful of people knew the full story. James Sterling hadn't left his office since the meeting, canceling all appointments and refusing to take calls. In the building's top-floor conference room, David sat at the head of a long mahogany table, surrounded by his team of lawyers and financial advisors. The wall of windows behind him showed Chicago's afternoon sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The numbers are solid, his chief financial officer explained, sliding documents across the table. We've secured the backing. With the evidence we've gathered about Sterling's past business practices, plus the personal angle, well, let's just say their board members are very interested in talking. David nodded, turning a pen between his fingers, a nervous habit he picked up from his mother. On the table before him lay 2 folders. One contained the proof of his parentage, including DNA test results and historical records. The other held evidence of questionable business decisions James Sterling had made over the years, decisions that had hurt small businesses and working people. What's our next move? Someone asked. Before David could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from the building's security desk. James Sterling was on his way up. David smiled slightly, right on schedule. Clear the room, he said quietly. His team gathered their papers and filed out, just as heavy footsteps approached the conference room door. James burst in, looking disheveled, his tie loose, his usually perfect hair messed up, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. You can't do this, he said, waving a stack of papers. These allegations, the board members you've contacted, you're trying to destroy everything I've built. David remained seated, calm in the face of his father's anger. Interesting choice of words, he said. Everything you've built. Tell me, how many other lives did you destroy while building your empire? How many people did you throw away like they were nothing? You don't understand, James said, his voice dropping. Business is complicated. Sometimes hard decisions have to be made. Hard decisions. David stood slowly. Like firing a pregnant woman because she might damage your reputation. Like offering her money to disappear to keep your perfect image clean. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. You know what's really interesting? While researching you, I found a pattern. Every time someone stood in your way, they disappeared. Small business owners who wouldn't sell, employees who complained about unfair practices, all gone, usually with a check and a non-disclosure agreement. James sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. What do you want? Money? A position in the company? Name it. David turned back to face him, and for a moment, James saw Angela in his son's expression, that same quiet strength, that same unwavering determination. I want justice, David said simply, not just for my mother and me, but for everyone you've hurt over the years. The board meets tomorrow morning. They'll be presented with two options. Either you step down voluntarily, transferring control to new leadership that will reform this company's practices, or everything comes out, every dirty deal, every person you've silenced, every ethical line you've crossed, including the son you paid to forget. You destroy the company just to get revenge. No, David replied. I'd transform it into something better, something that helps people instead of crushing them, something that proves success doesn't have to come at the cost of your soul. James's face had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. He looked at the photograph again, then at his son. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Want? David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I don't want anything from you, Mr. Sterling. I just thought you should know that the baby you paid to forget grew up to be someone his mother could be proud of. And now that you know, I have another meeting to attend. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and about your acquisition offer. I'll have my lawyers review it, but just so you know, I'm not interested in selling. I'm interested in buying. You should be receiving another proposal from my team this afternoon. I think you'll find it interesting. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving James Sterling alone with a photograph of the past and the realization that his carefully constructed world was about to change forever. James Sterling's corner office hadn't changed much in 26 years. The same floor-to-ceiling windows still offered a stunning view of Chicago's skyline, though his hair had turned silver and lines had carved themselves around his eyes. He sat in his leather chair, reviewing the morning's acquisition reports with reading glasses he'd recently started needing. His secretary's voice crackled over the intercom. Mr. Sterling, your 10 a.m. appointment is here. The CEO of Wilson Tech Solutions. Sent him in, James replied, standing to straighten his tie, the same nervous habit he'd had for decades. The young man who walked through the door made James pause mid-motion. Something about him seemed oddly familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. The visitor was tall, well-dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, carrying himself with a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. Mr. Sterling, David said, extending his hand. Thank you for meeting with me today. James shook his hand, noting the firm grip. Please sit down. I've been following your company's progress with great interest. Your AI technology is revolutionary. David settled into the chair across from James's desk, the same chair where his mother had sat 26 years ago. He'd practiced this moment countless times in his mind, but being here, seeing his father in person for the first time, made his heart race. He kept his expression neutral, professional. We're proud of what we've accomplished, David replied, opening his laptop. Our system has helped thousands of small businesses compete with larger corporations. Would you like to see how it works? For the next 30 minutes, David walked James through his technology. He watched his father lean forward, genuinely impressed by the innovation. It was strange, seeing the man who'd abandoned them actually admiring something he'd created. Remarkable, James said, removing his reading glasses. And you developed this entirely on your own? I had help along the way, David answered carefully. My mother taught me everything I know about business. She built her own company from nothing, starting with just a small coffee shop. Something flickered across James's face. A shadow of an old memory, quickly dismissed. Speaking of business, he said, reaching for a folder on his desk, I have a proposal for you. Sterling Enterprises would be interested in acquiring Wilson Tech Solutions. The numbers we're prepared to offer are substantial. David accepted the folder but didn't open it. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out an old photograph. Before we discuss numbers, Mr. Sterling, I'd like to show you something. He placed the photograph on the desk between them. It showed a young black woman standing in front of a coffee shop, holding a baby, her smile bright and determined. James's face went pale as he recognized her. That woman, David said quietly, is my mother, Angela Wilson, and that baby is me. The photo was taken 25 years ago, about a year after you fired her for being pregnant with your child. The office seemed to freeze. James stared at the photograph, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. How did you? He started, then stopped, looking up at David with new eyes, seeing the features he'd inherited from both his parents. I've known for years, David continued, his voice steady. Mom never told me who you were, but I'm good with technology, remember? DNA databases, facial recognition. It wasn't hard to figure out once I started looking. I've spent the last year building my company's success, knowing it would eventually lead me right here, to this office. James reached for the photograph with trembling fingers. I never knew what became of either of you. Really? David's voice held a hint of steel. You never thought to check? A successful businessman like yourself couldn't spare 5 minutes to see what happened to your own son. Silence filled the room as James struggled to find words. Outside, the city continued its busy day, unaware of the drama unfolding high above its streets. The proposal in that folder, David said, nodding toward the acquisition offer, it's very generous, I'm sure. But I'm not here to sell my company. I'm here because I wanted to look you in the eye, to see the man who thought he could just throw money at his problems and make them disappear. He stood up, straightening his jacket. My mother taught me that true success isn't measured by your bank account, it's measured by how you treat people, by the lives you touch, by the legacy you leave behind. I wonder, Mr. Sterling, how do you measure your success? But success didn't change him. He still called his mother every day, still remembered every employee's name, still made time to mentor young entrepreneurs from backgrounds like his own. Everyone deserves a chance to succeed, he'd say in interviews, though he never mentioned his own background or the father who'd never known him. Then came the day that changed everything. A major tech magazine ran a feature on rising stars in AI technology, with David's company highlighted as the next big thing. The article caught the attention of several major corporations, including one that made David's heart skip a beat when he saw the name, Sterling Enterprises. The email arrived on a Monday morning. Dear Mr. Wilson, we at Sterling Enterprises have been following your company's remarkable progress with great interest. We would like to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. David stared at the email for a long time, his finger hovering over the delete button. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph, his mother standing in front of her first coffee shop, holding him as a baby, her smile bright and determined despite all the challenges she faced. He picked up his phone and dialed. Mom, remember how you always said everything happens for a reason? I think it's time to test that theory. The wheels of fate had been turning for 26 years, and now they were about to come full circle. David saved the email draft of his response, but he didn't send it yet. First, he had some research to do, and a plan to set in motion that had been brewing in his mind since he first learned the truth about his father's identity. The years seemed to fly by like pages in a book caught in the wind. David grew from the curious boy who did homework in his mother's coffee shop into a young man who made headlines in his high school newspaper for creating an app that helped local businesses manage their inventory. His teachers couldn't stop talking about his perfect grades, but what made Angela proudest was how he'd still help elderly customers carry their coffee to their tables, remembering their orders by heart. You're going to do great things, Angela told him the day his first college acceptance letter arrived. They sat at their kitchen table, the same one where she helped him with his math homework and taught him to balance the shop's books. But remember, success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you treat people along the way. David had inherited his mother's determination, but there was something else driving him too, a quiet fire that burned beneath his calm exterior. While other teenagers spent their summers at the pool, he interned at tech startups, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. His mind seemed to work differently, seeing patterns and possibilities where others saw obstacles. When he got accepted to Howard University with a full scholarship, Angela cried tears of joy. The morning she put him on the plane to Washington, D.C., she felt both terrified and incredibly proud. Call me every day, she said, straightening his collar one last time. Mom, he laughed, pulling her into a hug, I'll be fine. You taught me everything I need to know. At Howard, David thrived. His professors quickly noticed his talent for combining technology with practical business solutions. While other students dreamed of working for big tech companies, David had different plans. He spent countless nights in the library researching artificial intelligence and its potential to help small businesses compete with larger corporations. His breakthrough came during his junior year. He developed an AI system that could predict inventory needs and customer patterns with remarkable accuracy. The prototype, tested in his mother's coffee shops, cut waste by 40% and increased profits by 25%. Word spread quickly in the business community. "Your son is going places," Angela's regular customers would say, showing her articles about David in business magazines. She'd smile, remembering the little boy who used to fall asleep among coffee beans. After graduating from Howard with highest honors, David faced a choice. Top tech companies were offering him six-figure salaries, fancy offices, and stock options. But he had bigger dreams. He applied to Harvard Business School, writing his essay about growing up in his mother's coffee shop and learning the true meaning of building something from nothing. The acceptance letter came on a rainy Tuesday, just like the day he was born. Angela flew up to Boston to help him move into his tiny apartment, her heart swelling with pride as she watched him navigate this new chapter of his life. At Harvard, David's vision began to take shape. He spent 2 years developing his AI technology, making it more powerful, more accessible. His professors were amazed by his ability to explain complex technology in simple terms that anyone could understand. But what really set him apart was his focus on helping small businesses, the underdogs, the dreamers, the people like his mother who built their success one cup of coffee at a time. By the time he graduated, David had transformed his idea into a full-fledged company, Wilson Tech Solutions. The name was a tribute to his mother, whose strength and wisdom had guided him every step of the way. His company's mission was simple but powerful: to give small businesses the same technological advantages as major corporations. The success came faster than anyone expected. Within 2 years, Wilson Tech Solutions was helping thousands of small businesses across the country. David's AI system was revolutionary. It could analyze market trends, predict customer behavior, and optimize operations in ways that previously only giant corporations could afford. Angela paused in counting the day's receipts, her heart tightening. She'd known this day would come, had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times. Looking at her son, tall for his age, with her determination and someone else's chin, she chose her words carefully. "Your father," she said, "was someone who wasn't ready to be a parent. But that's his loss, because look how amazing you turned out." David nodded, absorbing this like he did everything, thoughtfully, carefully. "Did you love him?" Angela looked around her shop, her creation, her triumph, and smiled softly. "I loved the person I thought he was, but life gave me something better instead. It gave me you and the strength to build all this." Neither of them knew then that this wasn't the end of the story, that somewhere in Chicago, in a high-rise office, decisions made 26 years ago were about to come full circle. But for now, they closed up shop together, walking home under the Atlanta stars, their footsteps in perfect sync. Atlanta welcomed Angela with its signature summer heat and the kind of humidity that made her clothes stick to her skin. She arrived with 2 suitcases, 3 months of morning sickness, and a determination that burned brighter than the Georgia sun. Her aunt's small guest room became her first home in this new city, its faded floral wallpaper and creaky twin bed a far cry from the life she'd left behind in Chicago. "You can stay as long as you need, baby," her aunt had said, pulling her into a warm embrace that smelled of coconut oil and fresh laundry. "But knowing you, you'll be on your feet before I can blink twice." Those first few months tested every ounce of strength Angela possessed. She found work at a local coffee shop, wrapping her growing belly in an apron that grew tighter each week. The morning shifts were brutal. She'd wake up at 4 a.m., fighting waves of nausea to serve businessmen who reminded her too much of James, their expensive watches flashing as they handed over credit cards without looking her in the eye. But Angela wasn't just serving coffee. During every break, she'd pull out her worn notebook, sketching business plans and crunching numbers. She'd watch the customers, noting which drinks sold best, what times were busiest, how the shop could run more efficiently. The owner, Mrs. Chen, noticed too. "You have good eyes," Mrs. Chen said one day, catching Angela reorganizing the storage room during her break. "You see things others miss." When her son was born on a rainy Tuesday in December, Angela named him David, after her father, a man who taught her that dignity wasn't something others could take from you. The baby had her deep brown eyes and a determination that showed itself from day one, tiny fists raised against the world before he could even focus his gaze. Mrs. Chen surprised her by holding her job and even offering flexible hours. "Bring the baby," she said simply. "My mother watched me work. I watched my mother work. This is how we survive." So little David grew up in the back room of the coffee shop, surrounded by the scent of espresso beans and the sound of steaming milk. Customers fell in love with his bright smile and the way he'd wave at everyone who passed his playpen. Some became regulars not just for the coffee, but to watch him grow. During nap times, Angela would study. She borrowed books on business management from the library, teaching herself about profit margins and market analysis, while her son slept peacefully beside her. At night, after David was tucked in, she'd work on her business plan, fingers flying over the keyboard of a second-hand laptop. 3 years of saving every penny, of living on rice and beans, of working doubles and learning everything she could finally led to her chance. A tiny storefront became available 2 blocks from the coffee shop. Nothing fancy, just a narrow space with good windows and potential. "I'm opening my own coffee shop," she told Mrs. Chen, hands shaking as she gave her notice. To her surprise, her former boss smiled. "About time," Mrs. Chen said, pulling out a piece of paper. "Here is a list of my suppliers. Good prices. Tell them I sent you." The day Morning Glory Coffee opened its doors, Angela stood behind her own counter, wearing an apron with her name stitched in gold thread. A gift from her aunt. 6-year-old David sat at a small table near the window, coloring and greeting customers with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in the business. The shop was different from others in the area. Angela had learned from every job she'd worked, every customer she'd served. She created a space that welcomed everyone, from busy professionals to young mothers with strollers. The coffee was excellent, but it was the atmosphere that brought people back. Warm, inclusive, a place where everyone felt at home. 1 year became 5, then 10. Morning Glory Coffee grew into 3 locations across Atlanta. David grew too, showing his mother's head for business and his own unique talents. He'd spend afternoons doing homework in the office, asking questions about inventory and profit margins that made Angela both proud and a little sad. He was growing up too fast, already thinking about futures and possibilities. When he was 12, he asked about his father for the first time. They were closing up the original shop, the evening sun painting the walls gold through the windows. "Mom," he said, carefully wiping down tables, "the other kids at school. They talk about their dads. Where's mine?" Outside, the spring sun was shining, oblivious to how the world had just shattered and reformed. Angela touched her stomach gently, feeling a fierce protectiveness surge through her. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "But don't worry, we're stronger than they think." She walked away from Sterling Enterprises for the last time, not knowing that this ending was actually just the beginning of a much longer story, one that would take 26 years to complete. 3 months passed like a dream, but reality has a way of waking even the deepest sleepers. Angela stood in her small apartment bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. The 2 pink lines seemed to glow in the early morning light, changing her world forever. She closed her eyes, counted to 10, and opened them again. The lines remained, unwavering in their truth. That morning, she dressed with extra care, her best navy blue suit, pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for graduation, hair neatly arranged. Each button she fastened felt like armor being donned for battle. The subway ride to Sterling Enterprises was a blur of rehearsed speeches and carefully planned words. The office buzzed with its usual morning energy, but everything felt different now. The familiar walls seemed colder, the smiles of her co-workers more distant. When she reached her desk, an email from James was waiting. "Meeting in my office, 9 a.m. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't planned to tell him so soon, but maybe this was fate making the decision for her. At precisely 9 a.m., Angela knocked on his door. James's voice called her in, and she found him standing by the window, his back to her, watching the city below. Something about his posture made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "Close the door," he said, not turning around. His voice was different, colder than she ever heard it. When he finally faced her, his eyes were like polished stone. "Sit down, please." Angela remained standing. "James, I need to tell you something." "I already know," he cut her off, sliding a folder across his desk. "Human Resources has prepared your severance package." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Severance package? I don't understand." "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be," James said, his voice eerily calm. "You'll receive 6 months' salary, health benefits through the end of the year, and a letter of recommendation for your next position. All we need is your signature on the non-disclosure agreement." Angela's hands gripped the back of the chair in front of her, knuckles turning white. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. For a moment, something flickered across James's face, pain, fear, perhaps even regret. But it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "The severance package is generous," he repeated, as if she hadn't spoken. "More than generous, considering the circumstances." "The circumstances?" Her voice rose slightly. "I've done nothing wrong. My work has been excellent. You know that better than anyone." "This isn't about your work," he said, straightening his tie, a nervous habit she'd noticed months ago. "This is about what's best for everyone involved. The company has a reputation to maintain. I have a reputation to maintain." Angela felt the room spin slightly. "And what about my reputation? My career? My future?" James pulled another document from his desk. "This is a separate agreement. A trust fund will be established. The child will be provided for, but there can be no contact, no acknowledgement of paternity. It's the best solution for everyone." "The best solution?" The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "You mean the best solution for you?" "Be reasonable," he said, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. "Think about what you're throwing away. This is a generous offer. Many women would be grateful." Angela straightened her spine, feeling a strength she didn't know she possessed flowing through her. Many women would be grateful to be paid off and thrown away? To have their lives, their careers, their dreams dismissed as an inconvenience? "You have 1 hour to sign the papers," James said, turning back to the window. "After that, security will escort you from the building. Your personal items will be shipped to your address." Angela stood there for a moment longer, watching the man she thought she knew transform into a stranger before her eyes. The city stretched out behind him through the window, the same view they'd shared that October night, now tainted by the harsh light of reality. She picked up her purse, leaving the unsigned papers on his desk. At the door, she paused. "You know what the saddest part is? I actually believe you were different, that what we had was real." James didn't turn around, but she saw his reflection in the window flinch at her words. Without another word, Angela walked out of his office, head held high, past the curious eyes of her co-workers, past the security guard who was already waiting by the elevator, past the lobby with its gleaming marble floors where she'd once walked in full of hope and ambition. Back in the summer of 1997, the gleaming glass towers of Sterling Enterprises stretched toward the sky, casting long shadows over the busy streets of downtown Chicago. Inside the topmost floor, James Sterling sat in his leather chair, reviewing the quarterly reports with a satisfied smile. At 42, he had everything a man could want. A billion-dollar company, a mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, and a reputation that opened every door in the business world. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows as his office door opened. "Mr. Sterling, your new executive assistant is here," his secretary announced. James looked up, adjusting his expensive tie, expecting another forgettable face. Instead, he found himself staring at Angela Wilson, a young woman whose presence immediately commanded attention not through loudness or force, but through a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room. Angela had graduated top of her class from Northwestern University, and her resume spoke of intelligence and determination. But in 1997 America, being a young black woman in corporate America meant facing invisible barriers at every turn. She had fought twice as hard to get half as far, and now here she was, ready to prove herself once again. "Welcome to Sterling Enterprises," James said, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "I hope you're ready for a challenge. We work hard here." "That's exactly what I'm looking for, Mr. Sterling," Angela replied, her voice carrying the warmth of her hometown in Georgia, mixed with the crisp professionalism of someone who knew her worth. "I believe in giving everything my best shot." Over the next few months, Angela proved herself invaluable. She reorganized the filing system, streamlined office procedures, and seemed to anticipate James's needs before he even knew them himself. The other executives noticed too. This wasn't just any assistant. She had a mind for business and an eye for detail that caught even the smallest discrepancies in contracts and proposals. James found himself looking forward to their morning meetings. Angela's insights were fresh, her suggestions thoughtful. She didn't just take notes, she offered solutions. In an office full of yes men, her honest opinions were like a breath of fresh air. Then came that fateful night in late October. The office was empty except for them, working late on a major merger proposal. The city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars, and the usual professional distance between them began to blur under the influence of shared success and too many hours of close collaboration. "We did it," James said, loosening his tie as they finished the last page. "This proposal is perfect. The board won't know what hit them." He poured 2 glasses of expensive scotch from his private collection, handling her a glass. Their fingers brushed, and something electric passed between them. Angela knew she should leave. The warning bells were ringing in her head, but the moment felt suspended in time. They had been dancing around this attraction for weeks, both pretending it didn't exist. She took a sip of scotch, its warmth spreading through her chest as James stepped closer. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said softly, his voice different now, not the voice of a boss, but of a man who had forgotten all about corporate hierarchies and social barriers. "This company runs twice as smooth since you arrived." The compliment hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Angela looked up at him, seeing not the powerful CEO, but simply a man. A man looking at her the way no one in this building had ever dared to look at her before. What happened next would change both their lives forever, though neither of them knew it that night. As the city hummed below and the stars watched from above, they crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. It was a moment of connection that felt real and true in the darkness of that October night, but would look very different in the harsh light of day. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a story that would span decades, touch multiple lives, and eventually shake the very foundation of Sterling Enterprises. But for now, in that moment, they were just 2 people who had forgotten about the world outside those office windows, forgetting that actions always have consequences, and that some decisions can echo through generations.